90 Pash riders would surround his broken storage unit less than 24 hours after he spent his last $65 on a rusted motorcycle. And the runaway boy who thought he just bought scrap metal would learn that some machines carry promises older than memory. He was 19, broke, and invisible in the way only boys from the system know how to be invisible, the kind of kid caseworkers describe as independent when they really mean no one's responsibility anymore. Landon Pierce had aged out of foster care 3 months earlier in Montana with a trash bag of clothes, a bus ticket, and a handshake that felt more like a dismissal. 6 homes in 5 years, 2 different high schools, 1 probation scare he didn't talk about, and a file so thick it needed a rubber band to stay closed. He learned early not to unpack fully, not to memorize street names, not to expect birthdays to be remembered. Permanence was a rumor other people lived. He drifted west because west felt like distance, and distance felt like safety, eventually landing outside Reno where he slept in an aging pickup that burned oil and picked up cash jobs sweeping floors at a repair shop whose owner didn't ask about his past as long as he showed up on time. He didn't complain. He didn't ask for help. He didn't plan further than a week ahead. The only thing that ever made him stop mid-task was the sound of motorcycles ripping down the highway beyond the shop, that deep rolling thunder that vibrated in his chest and made him feel, for a second, like movement was possible. He didn't know much about bikes. Couldn't tell a carburetor from a camshaft without Googling it. But he understood what they represented. Escape. Control. A machine that answered to your hands and no one else's. So when he saw the handwritten sign taped crookedly to a gas pump at a rural station 30 miles outside town, 1979 Harley Davidson. Doesn't run. $65. He didn't think about practicality. He thought about the way engines sounded when they were alive. $65 was everything he had left after rent on a tiny storage unit he used as a workshop and sleeping space when the truck wouldn't start. $65 was groceries for 2 weeks. $65 was gas money to get out if things went bad. He spent it anyway. The seller was a weathered rancher with sun-cracked skin and oil-stained hands who seemed almost relieved to see the bike hauled away. The Harley sat half-buried in dust behind a barn, tires flat, tank eaten through with rust, chrome flaking like dried skin. It looked less like transportation and more like a forgotten relic. Landon ran his hand along the handlebar and felt something stubborn in it, something that hadn't fully surrendered to decay. The rancher squinted at him before the exchange was done and muttered, "Some rides aren't meant to disappear." Then he walked back toward the barn without another word. Landon didn't ask what he meant. He loaded the bike onto a borrowed trailer, drove back to his unit, and spent the rest of the afternoon wiping grime from metal that most people would have scrapped without hesitation. The frame leaned slightly to the left, like it had taken a hard fall once and never fully recovered. The tank had holes the size of coins. The cables were frayed. The engine wouldn't budge. But the more he cleaned, the more he felt like he was uncovering something rather than fixing something. Late that night, under a single hanging bulb, he scraped rust from the side of the tank and saw lines beneath the corrosion, not stamped, not factory etched, but carved by hand. Initials. RK. And beneath them, the year 1979, cut deep and deliberate. Below that, a small emblem. A winged skull enclosed in a circle, detailed enough that it must have taken hours to engrave. It wasn't decorative. It was intentional. Someone had loved this bike enough to mark it permanently. The initials didn't match the rancher's name. They didn't match anyone Landon knew. He traced the grooves with his thumb and wondered who RK had been, and why something so personal had ended up abandoned behind a barn for pocket change. Around midnight, curiosity beat exhaustion. He snapped photos and posted them on a motorcycle forum, asking if anyone knew where to find parts for a '79 Harley Sportster and whether the engraving meant anything. He expected advice, maybe ridicule, maybe an offer of $50 to haul it away. What he didn't expect was the speed of the responses. At first they were normal, part numbers, suggestions, warnings that he'd spend more fixing it than it was worth. Then the tone shifted. One user asked for a closer photo of the engraving. Another asked where exactly he'd found it. A third asked if there were any additional markings under the seat. And then a new account appeared with no avatar and no history. Created that same hour, sending just one message. "Where did you get that bike?" The words didn't feel curious. They felt heavy, Landon stared at the screen longer than he wanted to admit before typing back. Bought it outside Reno. Why? The reply came almost instantly. Don't sell it. Don't move it. We're coming. He almost laughed. Internet tough guys were nothing new. But something about the certainty in that message unsettled him. He refreshed the thread. More users were commenting now, some tagging others, some going silent. One post simply read, "That's Ghost Ride." Landon didn't know who Ghost was. Didn't know why strangers suddenly cared about a rusted Harley that barely held together. He locked his phone, told himself it was nonsense, and went back to scraping rust, but his hands felt unsteady. Outside, the desert wind pushed against the thin metal walls of the unit, rattling them like loose sheet tin. He glanced toward the door more than once that night. Around 2 in the morning, he finally lay down on a folded blanket beside the bike, staring at the ceiling and listening to the quiet hum of the highway in the distance. He told himself he'd wasted his last $65 on junk. Told himself tomorrow he'd figure out how to flip it for parts. Told himself not to imagine that the engraving meant something bigger than metal. He fell asleep believing he was still alone in the world, unaware that by sunrise, engines would be igniting across state lines. Men he had never met would be pulling on leather vests bearing the unmistakable patch of the Hells Angels, and the rusted machine beside him would stop being scrap and start becoming a bridge between a runaway boy and a history that had never truly let him go. By the time the engines faded into silence, Landon understood one thing. The message online hadn't been a bluff. Nearly 90 riders stood outside his storage unit, their motorcycles lined up with quiet precision, chrome catching the desert sun. He felt the weight of their presence before a single word was spoken. At the front stood an older man with a steel-gray beard and calm, steady eyes. "You Landon Pierce?" he asked. The fact that he knew his name made Landon's stomach tighten. He nodded. "Name's Conrad Morrow. They call me Steel. We need to talk about that, Harley." There was no threat in his voice, only purpose. Steel stepped into the unit and stopped in front of the rusted 1979, studying it like someone reacquainting himself with an old friend. His thumb brushed over the engraved initials. RK, 1979, the winged skull, and something in his expression shifted. "This belonged to a brother of ours," he said quietly. "Ryan Kane. Road name was Ghost." The name seemed to settle over the riders behind him. He disappeared in '82. No body. No funeral. The bike vanished the same week. Landon swallowed. "I bought it outside Reno. $65. A few riders exchanged looks, but Steele only nodded. "We've been tracking rumors of this bike for decades. Every time we got close, it slipped away." Then he asked the question that felt heavier than the rest. "Did he leave you anything else?" Landon shook his head. "No, just the bike." Steele studied him for a long moment, then made a decision. "You need to come with us." Against every instinct he'd learned growing up in the system, Landon agreed. The convoy rolled out toward the edge of Carson City and stopped at an aging storage facility surrounded by desert brush. Steele unlocked Unit 118 with a worn key and lifted the metal door. Inside wasn't clutter, it was preservation. Carefully labeled boxes. A child's baseball glove sealed in plastic. Framed photographs protected from dust. A small rocking horse near the wall. In the center sat a metal lockbox. Steele opened it. Dozens of letters lay inside, each addressed simply, "For my son," all unopened. Beneath them rested a cassette tape labeled, "When he's ready." Steele's voice softened. Ryan had a boy, born in 1980. His mother died 2 years later. Ryan had enemies back then, serious ones. He believed the only way to keep his son safe was to remove himself completely. The words felt unreal, like they were meant for someone else. He paid 40 years rent on this unit. Told the club if the bike ever showed up, we'd find the boy. Landon's throat tightened. What was his name? Steele shook his head. Records were sealed. Destroyed in a flood in '85. He handed Landon the lockbox. Check the inside lid. Landon flipped it over. Beneath the older carving, RK, there was another set of initials, smaller but unmistakable, LP. His hands began to shake. Landon Pierce. For 19 years he had believed he'd been abandoned, forgotten in paperwork and state files. But this meant intention. Protection. A plan that had waited decades to surface. The riders behind him stood in respectful silence as Steele gestured toward an old cassette player in the corner. "He left you something else too," he said quietly. And as Landon stared at the tape labeled "When he's ready," he realized the motorcycle he'd bought for $65 wasn't scrap at all. It was a message that had finally found its destination. The tape hissed before the voice came through. Rough, steady, unmistakably real. "My name is Ryan Kane. If you're hearing this, then you found my bike." And the brothers kept their word. Landon stood frozen in the dim storage unit as the voice of a man he had never met filled the air between him and 90 silent riders. Ryan spoke plainly. He didn't glorify his life. He didn't make excuses. He said he had made enemies he couldn't outrun, men who would have used a child to settle scores. So he chose distance over danger. "I couldn't give you safety with me," the voice said. "So I gave you a chance without me." He explained that the bike was never meant to be valuable in money. It was meant to be a marker, something that could survive time, something that would lead the right people back to his son when it was safe. "If you found this," he continued, "then you were meant to. And if the club is standing there with you, then you're not alone." The tape ended in a soft click. No dramatic music. No final speech. Just silence and the weight of truth. For 19 years, Landon had believed he'd been discarded, another unwanted kid shuffled through paperwork in temporary homes. But standing there, holding a tape recorded decades earlier, he understood something that shifted everything. He hadn't been abandoned. He had been protected. Steele gave him time. No one rushed him. No one filled the quiet with unnecessary words. Eventually, Steele stepped forward and said simply, "He loved you the only way he knew how." The next morning, the riders returned to Landon's storage unit, not as an intimidating wall of leather and chrome, but as builders. Toolboxes opened. Parts appeared from saddlebags and truck beds. Someone sourced a refurbished carburetor. Another brought a tank in better condition. One man specialized in vintage wiring. Another had rebuilt more 79 engines than he could count. They didn't just fix the bike for him. They taught him how to tear down the engine properly, how to clean and seat valves, how to listen for the difference between a healthy idle and a troubled one. Landon's hands, once uncertain, grew steadier with each bolt turned. The Harley slowly transformed from corroded relic to breathing machine. Weeks later, when the engine finally roared to life, the sound was deeper than he imagined. Not just mechanical, but almost symbolic, like something long dormant had chosen to wake up. The riders didn't cheer wildly. They nodded. A few smiled. Steele handed Landon a plain leather vest. No patch, no rake, just 2 words stitched across the back. "Go, son." It wasn't about membership. It wasn't about claiming him. It was acknowledgement, recognition, family, not by obligation, but by choice. Landon didn't suddenly have a perfect life. He still had to work, still had to figure out who he wanted to become. But he no longer carried the question that had followed him since childhood. Why didn't anyone want me? He rode the rebuilt Harley for the first time on an open stretch of desert highway outside Carson City. The wind pressing against his chest, the engine rumbling beneath him like a steady heartbeat. He realized then that the bike wasn't just transportation. It was proof. Proof that someone had thought ahead for him, planned for him, loved him in the only way they knew how. Months later, at a quiet gas station near Flagstaff, Landon noticed a teenage boy sitting alone by the vending machines, backpack at his feet, eyes scanning cars the way kids do when they're deciding whether to ask for help. The look was familiar, guarded, tired, invisible. Landon parked the Harley and walked over, helmet in hand. "You got somewhere safe tonight?" he asked gently. The boy shook his head. Landon nodded toward the diner across the lot. "Come on, let's get you something to eat." Because that was the final piece Ryan Kane had left him. Not just a motorcycle, not just a name, but a responsibility. The understanding that being protected once means learning how to protect someone else. The rusted Harley had been a breadcrumb across 40 years. 90 riders had honored a promise. But the real legacy wasn't the bike. It was the choice to make sure no kid who felt forgotten had to stay that way.